Thanks everybody for taking the time to join our Brown Bag, our alumni panel today. And thanks to our panelists, especially, we have members from Chi Omega, Phi Sigma Pi, and Farmhouse joining us today. I'm going to actually let them each introduce themselves and tell us what organization they're with, what volunteer role they play, and a little bit too about how that fits into the larger structure of the organization. We recognize that everybody is set up a little bit differently in our own personal organization. So they'll paint a picture for us about how they're involved, and then we'll dive in with some questions about what they need from us as communicators. So Frank, you're the first little Brady Bunch square on my screen. So I'm going to start with you if you want to introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Frank Bezdachek. I'm a member of the Minnesota Farmhouse Fraternity. This is our 90th anniversary on the campus of the University of Minnesota. I served as an advisor for the chapter. I was also the House Corporation president and served on that board. Former member of the Farmhouse editorial board for the publication, scholarship judge, and served as on the building and planning committee. We just built a new chapter house on the St. Paul campus, and I was the fundraiser for that activity, and was one of the 4 people on the construction committee. Currently an ex officio member of the House Corporation Board of Directors, and I report at all their meetings. And I'm the former chair of the University of Minnesota Greek Alumni Council. I'm still on the board of directors, but 2020 was my year. And recipient of the Farmhouse Master Builder of Men Award. So anything else, Ashley?
Wow, you've really done it all, Frank. You're bringing a lot of perspectives. That's amazing. No, I guess, can you tell us a little bit about who you interact with the most in terms of like at headquarters? Are there specific staff positions you work with? Do you mainly communicate with other volunteers, or what does that look like at Farmhouse?
Sure. My biggest interaction over the fundraising period of time was certainly with Allison and Michaela. And both, very, very helpful through that process, talked me off the bridge several times. But certainly I deal with Christian and Cody. And then, throughout the process, the building process, I would deal with different chapters like Iowa State and Purdue who had gone through a building process prior to Minnesota. And so that's primarily the people that I work with.
Great, thank you. All right, Kay, you're my next Brady Square, as I call them lovingly. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the organization structure.
Okay, great. I'm Kay Calloway, and I am actually serving currently as the Director of Alumni for Chi Omega. So I am not a volunteer. But I am a previous volunteer. So I traveled way back in the day as a national leadership consultant, and then held several volunteer roles on our national teams, including the national recruitment team back in the late 80s, early 90s. And then most recently, I've been on the convention leadership team prior to taking this position as the paid staff member for the Director of Alumni. So I'm going to kind of flip that a little bit. So I actually work with several of our national teams, primarily our ACT, which is an Alumni Connections team. And that team was formulated so that we could really kind of focus on those alumni at large that are not involved with an alumni chapter. And that has been a really great committee just to try to engage alumni that would not otherwise have an alumni chapter close by. So that's a team of about 13 volunteers, and we do all types of initiatives throughout the year. So I work very closely with them. I also am the liaison for our National Philanthropy Alliance with Make-A-Wish. So I work with some volunteers with that. And then I also oversee our alumni chapter volunteers. So all of those leaders, I do not have any real interaction with a lot of our chapter advisors. That's done through our chapter services department. And let's see, some of the questions that you had asked: how does our organization interact with volunteers most? Well, we do a quarterly national volunteer update. That's all of our national volunteers, just with updates that are going on within the fraternity. And so that's one thing. We also, have had communications with our entire alumni, group, for just different things, especially during COVID, trying to keep everyone informed. And then as far as instructions or trainings that our teams do, we usually, every national team that we have has a yearly training. All of those have been held virtually this past year. And then the training is ongoing throughout the years with those liaisons and with those staff members that work with those particular volunteer teams. And then with specific teams, we would work with them and communications as needed. So those would be going through our liaisons, our staff liaisons, to those specific volunteer teams. So that's a little bit about my role. And as I said, I'm not a volunteer, but I'm anxious to hear what you all have to say about volunteers and what they want from their national organizations. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kay. I think that perspective will actually help a lot because you've been in both sides of it. So that'll help.
Thanks.
All right, Colleen, last but not least, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing for your organization.
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Colleen Arnett. I'm an alumna of Phi Sigma Pi National Honor Fraternity. I have served in several different volunteer roles over the years, faculty advisor, alumni advisor. I've served on our foundation's board of directors. Most recently, I just finished up a 3-year period as an operations advisor for our chapter excellence board advisory team. And so that is a group of small sets of advisors. So you have 4 advisors per cohort of like 10 to 12 chapters. And our goal is really to provide supplemental advising and guidance to those chapters to fill in the support from the national office and their chapter consultants, specifically centered around what we call the chapter standards of excellence. So those annual benchmarks that we're looking for every chapter to achieve, to demonstrate a healthy, thriving chapter. The chapter excellence board advisors work with the chapters directly on that, and then any other concerns, areas that the chapters would like some help on, and just being there to encourage them as well, and help them recognize when they're going in the right direction, because I think they sometimes are really critical of themselves and don't feel like they're doing enough when maybe they're actually doing a lot better than they think they are. And so that is a really awesome way for me to just stay engaged with the collegiate members, while also serving with fellow alumni in those roles. In terms of how we communicate with the national headquarters, they do email, there'll be occasional phone calls, especially for wanting to have some one-on-one conversation with staff members. And then also we have a platform called Core. So that includes discussion boards, electronic learning modules, and a variety of other resources. And that has been something that the national organization has really developed into a strong platform, both for resources, but also communication. And so you can sign up for different listservs, have, email digests coming in, and it's a nice way to keep track of that information in one central location versus, wait, where in my email did I put that? In terms of training, we have an annual training for the Chapter Excellence Board advisors, where everyone gathers, sometimes in person or sometimes virtually, depending on what's happening in the world. And we are able to go over the basics of our responsibilities, and then also talk through some of the things that are on the docket for goals for the upcoming year, things we're hoping to help the chapters focus on. And then all of that is supplemented with email communication throughout the year, as well as some coffee chats, which I have really appreciated. Those happen maybe once a month, maybe once every other month. a chance for all of the volunteer team to come together and network and hear how things are going for each other. And then also a chance for us to hear from the national staff. And so we have 2 primary points of contact on the national staff for our specific volunteer role. And then others will pop in and say, like, we wanted to let you know what is going on in this area of chapter operations, or, hey, you know, our chapters are about to deal with this in their semester timeline. And so those coffee chats have been a fun way to stay connected with each other and also to stay updated on things. So yeah, excited to be here and have a good conversation.
Thank you so much. Gosh, I've been like feverishly writing down notes. I'm like, coffee chat, like already just in explaining how your organizations function. I'm like, so many ideas. This is great. So you talked a little bit too about emails and phone calls and things. So I'm curious to know, whoever wants to share, you know, what is not only what kind of communication you receive, but what you want to receive. Like maybe you're getting emails weekly, monthly, however, you know, maybe they're every other month or something. Is that best for you? Or do you really prefer it when there's a phone call? And is that a one-on-one phone call? Or is that like, hey, me and all the other volunteers that are in this position, we get on a call together once a month, and that's what's really beneficial to me? What is helping you do your volunteer role in terms of communication? Emails, newsletters, phone calls, all of the above?
Right. I think when we have the monthly or quarterly information with our foundation leader, you know, I think those are good. I think oftentimes the headquarters presentations are heavy on presentations and short on responding to folks' questions. You know, in Zoom, they have a tendency for some reason or another to watch the clock, and as soon as it hits the 60-minute mark, they're all excited about getting off the line, although there may be numerous questions yet to be answered. I think it's important for, you know, the headquarters organizations to understand that they would not exist without the chapter setup, and you know, I think they really need to respond to that. One of the things that a couple of people had mentioned is, you know, the different methods of keeping informed. We have Omega Phi, which has a herd book function where I can go in at any time and locate any member of any chapter and all of their pertinent information, as well as getting information about the organization, what's coming up, the annual conclave. I can also go in there and track to the penny all of my contributions that have been made over the last half century to the farmhouse organization. So I think, you know, I think sometimes people feel like they're probably inundated with too many requests for contributions, you know, but I understand that's a function of the foundation. But most of them are webinars right now, and you know, if they're critical, it's a text or else a personal phone call.
So you do get some of those texts or phone calls if something critical is happening. But I appreciate the input about, you know, presentations can be kind of one-sided. Like, we need to inform you of this thing, but then there's not time to ask the questions or other maybe unrelated even questions that volunteers might need. Kay or Colleen, anything to add?
I think one of the things I've appreciated about how our national staff communicates with the CEB advisor team in particular is we know that at the start of every month, there will be an update that's sent out to us. So I know to look for that. And the thing I appreciate is that they really have done a great job of making it a comprehensive document. It is something that highlights like cool things that are maybe happening for the members of our volunteer team, or birthdays or things like that to help us stay connected as people. But then it also highlights, here are deadlines that are coming up for our chapters. Here are some some tasks that they are hoping we can include in our work with our chapters. So, you know, in late January, early February, are we touching base with our chapters about recruitment as we are getting through other times in the semester? I have the good fortune to actually work in higher education, so I understand semester rhythms very well because of what I do in my day job, so to speak. But were I not in higher ed already, having those insights into, hey, this is where our chapters are. This is what our college students are maybe worrying about. They've got midterms coming up, or there's spring breaks coming up when those existed, or, you know, especially with COVID, as our national staff are hearing what the chapters are experiencing at their institutions, some of the highlights of things that we can keep in mind when talking with our chapters. So those monthly updates have been a really helpful resource that I've been really thankful for. It's a great reference point as the month goes on. And then, yeah, if we have questions, we can follow up by email, by phone. Our staff has been really responsive to us and supporting us in the work we do.
That's great to know. Yeah, Frank.
Colleen, is that something that one of those, just an example of one of those monthly that you could share with us? Because it would be good to use that as a document to go forward with our organization as well.
Yeah, I can look and see if I can find something. A member of our national staff who works with our board, she's actually also on the call, so she might have easy access to it, but I will look and see if I can find something to maybe drop in the chat for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Look at that.
I'm going to just say that we're real cautious about not inundating our alumni, I would say alumni at large, with, you know, we're very targeted with our messaging for certain, you know, people that are stakeholders or what have you, but we really do coordinate across all aspects of the fraternity so that we can kind of really structure our communications to be informative, as well as, you know, not too often. So we, you know, there's a lot of planning that goes along with lots of women who are involved with that, the subject matter. And then we also do have a message that goes to all of our chapter officers and chapter advisors once a month with, again, similar to what Colleen said, just kind of a monthly touch base. This is due, you know, those kind of things. But as far as our alumni, our messaging is a little more sparse, but I would say a little bit more meaty when we do send it.
That makes sense. The quality over quantity method, which I think is probably important. So that said, do you all feel in the know with your organizations? Do you feel like you have a good understanding of what's going on within your fraternity or sorority? And is that because you are connected as an individual member, like on social media or things, or is it because you're a volunteer, and as a volunteer, you are intentionally kept in the loop and in the know with information? Sounds like with some of the monthly updates and things that maybe you are, but I want to ask specifically if you feel like you need more of that, or you're getting what you need there.
If I could, I like Colleen's idea, because I think too often we get too many messages from too many people out of headquarters, and it would be nice to have one concise thing, because, you know, sometimes we're concerned about where things are going and how it's operating. We've had a couple of situations where there have been some demands that you know, they've put on all chapters without consulting you know, the leadership of the house corporations or the advisors, and have included, in essence, a penalty if you did not participate. And those kinds of decisions, we've had to have conference calls with the CEO to discuss that and determine how that could be better handled in the future.
I think that's good feedback. Kay or Colleen, anything to add? It's okay if not. One thing I want to talk about specifically too, I know I've talked a lot about communication more like phone calls, emails, that kind of thing. But social media obviously is a big part of our jobs as communicators, especially now and especially in the very digital year that we have had. So I'm curious if you are each connected with your organizations through social media, and if so, what channels are you most engaged with? Why is it, what are you learning from social media? Why is that the platform? What do you like about it? Talk to me a little bit about you personally and your organization's social media channels.
So I can start with this. So I am not a super diverse person when it comes to social media. I am on Facebook and I'm on Instagram. I keep it simple because that's about what I have the capacity to process and keep track of. I very much appreciate that both the national organization and the chapters that I work with have an active presence in at least one of those. So our chapters, they're much more in the world of Instagram and maybe other social media accounts that I'm not there on those platforms to see. But then Facebook as well, I think the national organization does a good job at keeping information there as well and making sure that they are publishing announcements, exciting news that's happening, even just helping people be aware of different more public sphere type of things. So recently with Black History Month, they've been partnering with different organizations to offer some learning opportunities for our members. And so that comes across Facebook and has been a really valuable opportunity to hear what the national organization is doing just in general, but then also as a volunteer, it's helpful to keep tabs on things that others are going to be seeing and maybe having questions about. So, and I think that, as with all things, there are so many other social medias out there that are probably being explored. But for me as a volunteer, it is knowing what I have the capacity to keep track of so that things aren't slipping through the cracks when I try to do too many at once.
Well, and that's why I ask, because, every individual is different and interacts with social media differently. So as long as you're getting, you're not relying on social media for that important information and training. But I think that's a really good point, Colleen, about it is another opportunity to be in the know with some of the general things that are happening and to have an idea of what kind of questions might come up, right? Like, okay, this information has been shared publicly from the national account. Is somebody in a chapter I'm working with going to have a question about it or that kind of thing? So I don't usually think through that far with posts and things. So I think that's a great way to be using that. Kay or Frank, any social media tidbits you want to share?
Just from a general perspective, obviously Instagram is much more for our collegiate chapters, but we're finding our young alumni are on Instagram, and some of our older alumni now are taking on the Instagram bandwagon, whereas it seems like Facebook used to be more of a platform for some of our alumni things, but we're doing from our national organization kind of across the board on Facebook as well as Instagram, and trying to get some of that alumni engagement, because again, you're seeing a lot of the collegians, and but we want to show that lifetime membership and have some alumni engagement on those platforms as well, because we know our alumni are there.
I would agree with Kay in the the number of methods that are available. Certainly, our chapter has been on campus, as I said, for 90 years. So we have living alumni and chapter members from 18 to 98. And I think it's a challenge for the national organizations to select a method to get a message out. I have one alum that's my era, that if I send him an email, I have to send him then a text message to Paul, check your email, because he looks at texts, he doesn't look at emails. And so you might ask, well, why don't you put it all in the text? Well, sometimes they're fairly long documents. But, and I think that's probably, as Kay was saying, probably much more apparent today with the newer members, in that they may not respond very quickly to an email. They're very used to Instagram or a text message. And so I think that offers a real challenge for national organizations. You know, Farmhouse Fraternity still puts out a quarterly printed publication, but it's also available online in a digital format. Some like the hard copy in their hands, but you know, that's a challenge. I agree.
I love what you said about at some point when you're working with someone specific, you just kind of get to know what their style is. And so I think from a headquarters perspective, we recognize that with some volunteers, but then we have to think en masse, right? Like if there's something we know Frank needs to know, maybe we gotta text Frank to check his email. It sounds like he's checking his email, but if we need to let everybody across the country in Frank's position know, we're a little more limited on how we can follow up and do that en masse too. So I think that's, yeah, that's good input. So we touched a little bit on this in some of our introductions, but I'm curious what the instruction and training looks like. Does that happen for you as a volunteer annually? Are you trained once when you sign up to do this volunteer gig and then never again? Or what has that looked like? Or what is it looking like for you now? I know Colleen mentioned some virtual things this year, of course. It sounds like that's normally an in-person event. Is there usually like a conference that's specifically more for certain volunteers that work with chapters?
So every summer, our fraternity hosts its national conference, and if advisors of the CEB team are going to be attending, they will host an in-person training just to, again, begin starting that networking process. You know, there's something to be said for in-person training when you can do it. And so usually, my numbers might be a little bit off, but I would say like a third to half of the board is usually there in person and able to do training, and then they offer an online training after that for anybody who wasn't able to travel and be at the national conference. This year that was then all online, so they just took the module, and they do it every year. So I have been on the board now for 3 years, and I have done 3 trainings, which is great because it means that since the composition of your 4 member boards that are serving your smaller cohorts of chapters, that can change from year to year. It helps reestablish that your knowledge is accurate, that there haven't been changes to things that are happening, and then also just give you that chance to connect with anybody who might be new to your board as you're going to be working together over the next year. So yeah, it is an annual training, whether you're doing it for the very first time or you're a returner, they do want you to go through that training.
That's great. Kay, are you the one on headquarters staff that's coordinating some of these trainings and things, or maybe communicating out when those are happening?
Yes. So as I mentioned, I work with our ACT, our Alumni Connections team, and we have a yearly training. So I coordinate that along with the chair of that national team. And in the past, before COVID, we would all go to headquarters and have a working weekend. And if we had new members, we would train those women. But again, it's a great time just for team building as well as just working and planning for new initiatives and new things. So all of our national teams do have that type of training. As I mentioned, most are virtual this year. But I feel that it's a real benefit for our volunteers who serve on these national roles. We do take care of their travel, and it's in most cases we're able to stay at headquarters. So it's kind of just a real fun event for them as well, something that they look forward to. So just a little weekend, women's weekend, so to speak, to gather and just have sisterhood and work along the way. So that's how our teams have done their training. Individual for alumni chapter leaders. We have done a lot of those this year on Zoom, and which has been really great because a lot of times it's just been a phone call. So I've really incorporated that with some of our chapter board, our alumni chapter board leaders. And it's just been fun because you can walk through resources with them online. And so I've found some benefit from Zoom in that regard as far as training for those particular volunteers.
Great. Do you think you might continue to do those via Zoom moving forward since you had success with that now, even if you don't have to?
Absolutely, especially with the alumni chapter leaders. I think it's a great way for them. You know, I can see them, they can see me, ask questions, walk through those things together. I think it's been a real success for all those who have participated that way. So I definitely see that continuing.
That's great.
If I could, you know, there's a lot of information and training provided for chapter members. There's leadership institutes, et cetera. For the alum, we have a national conclave every 2 years. And that at that time, you know, I've worked on bylaw revisions in regards to that. But there are also topics that we suggest that are important and that should be covered. Obviously, you know, liability, personal liability, chapter liability, et cetera, has been a big issue recently, especially with alcohol consumption, et cetera. So it's important that we get updated on that and that the chapters do as well, because sometimes it's just given to the alumni and chapter members have a different topic, but we've emphasized the need for that across the board. But you know, I like the idea that there should a more formalized training program for the volunteers. I think is critical, and I think we could probably improve upon that.
I love what you said about, you know, making sure, well, that alumni have the opportunity to suggest or recommend some topics for the collegians. I think that's great to have a way to provide that input and that feedback, but that also that you're receiving the same training, especially if you're working with those chapters. You need to know what the chapter's focuses are and what it is they're learning about, whether that's alumni chapters or collegiate chapters, kind of having that same, you know, especially if you can't hold them accountable and make sure that they're doing the things they need to do if you don't know what those things are or you haven't gone through that training yourself and things too. So that's an interesting perspective, that not just training you how to be a volunteer with this chapter, but making sure that you understand the things that the chapters themselves are being asked to do. I've heard the word networking come up a few times, and I think that's really interesting because I wasn't thinking about that in those perspectives, but I think that's probably a benefit of staying involved in your organization as an alum, is getting to network with other alumni and other members from other chapters that, you know, you may not have met otherwise. In-person events obviously is a great way to do that. It sounds like there's some different boards and things where you have regular phone calls and things. Are there other ways that your organization is promoting that networking and those relationships amongst the volunteers? Do you feel, follow-up question, do you feel like sometimes you learn from one another and not just from headquarters staff? Like, might you call somebody else who's in a similar position to you that maybe works with a different area or a different chapter to ask them questions instead of going up maybe to your staff liaison? I suspect so. That's why I asked.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mentioned earlier when we were going through the building project, there's no book out there about how to start and run a fundraising campaign and a building project, et cetera. I thought of writing the book, and then I got into the project and I said, no, I'm just, I think I'll pass.
There's a reason that book's not out there, huh?
That's right. You know, and even our national organization really, you know, it couldn't help us that much. So it was important that I had access to visiting with people from Iowa State and Purdue and SDSU that had gone through building projects recently. And then we had some people from another chapter visit our house. They had built a chapter and then came to our house and said, geez, I wish we would have done some of these things. You know, it's everything from hiring the architect and the builder and fundraising, et cetera, et cetera. But, that's where it's important to be able to contact other people, and they're very open to give you that information. And it's very accessible because we have all of their contact information on this Omega Phi website.
That's great.
And I would say what has been really helpful, Ashley, you had mentioned not just contacting national staff, but contacting each other and volunteer groups. That has been really helpful. So through our discussion platform that we have available for us, we have a channel that is specifically for Chapter Excellence Board advisors. And so somebody will share a resource. Maybe they created a really awesome presentation talking about our standards of excellence that really connected with chapter members. And they'll say, hey, if anybody else is looking for a way to help the chapter members understand what these are all about, or if we're having trouble connecting with different chapter officers on topics. So that's been really great to have that community of internal discussion. And then also know we have the national staff who were able to approach of like, okay, here's how we're talking about doing it. Is there anything that we're missing that the chapters need to be doing in a certain way or to a certain standard? But yeah, that internal community of volunteers that we are able to have that has been extremely helpful because it allows us to do some best practices, allows us to create some consistency and really just share the wealth of information and knowledge. So like, I don't necessarily know a lot about messaging apps, but we have advisors who they love that. And so they're able to help us figure that out and know like, okay, this is the best way to use a GroupMe or whatever one of the others are. So yes, being able to take advantage of the strengths that each person is bringing to that team and then use it to the benefit of our chapters has been awesome.
That's great. I like you use the word community, and I think that's really important too. I think that's maybe a better word than networking. Like I said earlier, you have that community for consistency and for advice, for feedback. You can share, you can learn from one another. Kay, what about you?
One thing I'd like to add is that I have had alumni chapters, reach out to me, whereas they might not know an alumni chapter that is comparable in size to one. So I would say possibly reach out to your headquarters staff liaison to maybe make a connection if you have a question of a chapter that is similar in size to yours. So I kind of feel like I'm a connector, and especially during COVID, we've had some great ideas. And so knowing of those ideas, I've been able to share and say, you can contact XYZ alumni chapter, or let me put you in contact with them. So we're not reinventing the wheel, but yet there is a way that they can communicate with a chapter that is similar size and all that type of thing. So don't hesitate to reach out to those staff members to ask those questions for connections. Maybe they could just give you the name, and usually they're so appreciative of that and they can do it on their own. So but anyway, I feel like I've been a connector sort of in that way. So ask that staff member or staff liaison to make those connections if you are hesitant or don't know who to reach out to.
I think some of the other aspects we're looking at is not only contacting other fraternal chapters internationally, but we also rely on consulting with some of the sororities at the University of Minnesota, because I've found that their ability to think clearly this past year has been probably much more or much better than some of the males. And I'm speaking only for our chapter, but our chapter has worked well with some of the sororities on campus in getting ideas of what they were doing for virtual recruitment, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's been beneficial.
That's a really good point. I think we started talking about, providing a space and providing opportunities for our volunteers to be able to engage and interact with one another. But to Frank's point too, maybe, and to Kay's, like maybe helping our volunteers consult outside organizations, other groups on their campus and things. I think that is something, especially this year. Maybe it's not another NIC or IFC organization, maybe it's not another MPC organization, but like how is especially if you're working with a specific chapter, how is your Greek community working together and encouraging some of that from our members and things too. And as alumni who are volunteering with those chapters, helping kind of push for that or getting the ball rolling could be really important. So it's a good point. I also want to ask too, how you all feel supported as volunteers. So not in terms of the technical, logistical things that you're getting, the trainings, the emails and things, but how, and hopefully you do feel supported, but in what ways do you feel valued and supported as a volunteer? And if it's taking a long time, then maybe that's something we as communicators need to work on.
No, I guess my thought on that is I've never had any question about that. Anytime I've had a challenge or a question, and I've been able to connect with a CEO personally, and find the right path to go on or the correct answer. So I've always felt very, very well supported in any of my questions or concerns.
That's great.
And I would add to that, I have also not only been a volunteer in my organization, but I was also on the national staff for 3 years. And so I have seen both sides of it. And that has helped me recognize that a lot of the work our national organization is able to do is by tapping into that manpower of our volunteers. And that is not in any way to diminish the amazing work that our national staff does. They work so hard day in and day out for our chapters. But to see some of the programs they've been able to bring forward, to see some of the initiatives they've been able to launch that are helping our organization grow both at the national and at the chapter level, and to recognize that some of that comes from volunteers being willing to step up and say like, yeah, I can help with that. When I was on national staff, I worked in expansion specifically, which was very volunteer heavy for us, needing those references of like, what about this college or university, or, oh, hey, I know people here who could help us get a chapter started. So I think that having that dual perspective has helped me recognize my value as a volunteer, but then also knowing that our current staff does a fantastic job of letting us know that they are appreciative of us, that we are part of their team. We don't get a check from them every month, but we are part of the team that is helping them do the work that they are setting out to do. And even something small, like they have every year a volunteer appreciation day or week or a point in time where they say like, we want to recognize all of our volunteers. They send really cute little care packages. I think either at the end of the fall or I think it was sometime in the fall, they even sent these cute little COVID-19 care packages where it was a hand sanitizer and a little card saying, thanks for giving us a hand in all you do, or something cute like that. So to know that in addition to the work that they are doing for our fraternity, that they are taking that time to create those moments and create that outreach for the volunteers, I think it is an encouragement. We volunteer because we care about the organization, but to know that that is seen and appreciated, I've never had a doubt about it at all. It is always there.
That's awesome. We did get a question in the chat, and it's about email specifically. So as alumni who volunteer, are you able to easily distinguish like headquarters emails that are sent to you as a member, just as a member of the organization, versus emails that are sent to you from headquarters as an advisor or as a volunteer, who might just be copied on an email, like going to a chapter, for example, or going to collegians or other alumni, and you're more like CC'd? Are you able to kind of distinguish? Is there something that your organization does that helps with that? Or is it maybe overwhelming or confusing? What are your thoughts?
I was going to say on our informs that go to, again, either our whole alumni base or just team specific, we usually have a header that says this email, you're receiving this email because you are on are a national volunteer, or you are receiving this because you are a recruitment volunteer. Or so we try to specify so that they'll know the reason they're getting that, and that is like on our informs. As far as regular emails, I would say that that hopefully if I'm forwarding one of those informs on, you would be able to tell that. But that's what we do on our informs, to make it specific and targeted, and so they know the reason why they're getting it.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I had to pause from it. I don't think I've ever not known why I'm receiving it. So I was trying to scan through my email really quickly to see like what was it that helped feed that. I think either using a subject line, or like Kay was saying, if there's a header of some kind, so maybe it's a different header for your volunteers than it is for just your membership. But yeah, I don't think I've had moments where I wasn't sure. I think our staff is also very good at pointing out in the subject line. So even the subject line can be a huge thing of like, Chapter Excellence Board Advisor update, or if I see something that's just coming through with a more topical subject line, I probably know that that's more of a larger membership email than it is a volunteer specific.
I'm thinking through my own things too, because I know I also, we send the emails. So thinking in terms of like when we copy somebody, but when it's a mass email tool like Informs or something, there isn't really like, not like an Outlook where you can kind of see, oh, I've just been copied as an FYI on this. So if we were to send something to all collegiate chapter presidents, and it says like important update, blah, blah, blah. Dear collegiate chapter presidents, and I'm an advisor, or I'm a national officer or something who just works with collegiate chapters, I'm just gonna know that I'm being copied just sort of inherently because I'm not a collegiate chapter president, but I work with them? Or do you, Kay, are you saying that you would maybe send them a separate email that says you're receiving this because this other thing was sent to collegiate, like 2 emails to the separate audiences, as opposed to just one where you have the other group like included on it and hoping that they understand why they're getting it?
In our informs, we're real specific. We'd say this is going to chapter officers as well as chapter advisors. So we would list who all is getting that.
List who all's in there. Okay. That's great.
On our informs. And again, on emails, like it might be one thing if a regional director sends something to a chapter, she would obviously copy the advisor, but that would be an email. So we do our informs for most of our emails, probably more than 100 email, we would do it that way. And we would have that specified at the top.
And actually, I would add to that, one of the things that our national staff has been really great about is before something is sent to chapter president. So for example, within the past week or so, an announcement about this summer's national conference was sent out that it's going to be virtual. We as advisors received an email shortly before that was sent to chapter presidents, letting us know, hey, just in case you get questions about this, we're about to send this communication to chapter presidents or to all of our chapter members, or they define for us the populations receiving it. And that is really helpful, because then I can anticipate, maybe I get a question about this, or I can keep my ear open to see if there is chatter or frustration or disappointment or whatever the case may be. And so instead of a CC, it's more of a, hey, we're about to, and I love that proactive approach that they've taken in keeping us informed on some significant decisions that happen.
That's a really good point. And Heather just pointed that out in the chat too, that like, if it's something really important that people need to know, tell the volunteers that work with those chapters ahead of time so they're prepared to answer questions and they know it's coming. I would love to think that I am just that prepared all the time. And to be honest, it's not always the case, but I will work towards it. Frank, what about you?
Ashley, you had mentioned something earlier that I want to bounce back. When you talked about the community aspect, University of Minnesota, we have about 60 fraternities and sororities in 4 different councils. And in 2012, an organization headed up, actually was the president at the time wanted some investigation into the whole Greek organizations and how they could do a better job. And from that came the Minnesota Greek Alumni Council. And that organization, like I said, I was chair last year, but it deals with everything from zoning issues with the city of Minneapolis and chapters to recruiting, summer recruiting, orientations, campus safety, which is a huge thing right now in Minnesota. And we send out information throughout the year. I sent out 80 different pieces of communications to our list of 826 stakeholders regarding what was happening at the university and what their decisions were regarding COVID and moving forward. But I think it's been beneficial to been involved with that organization, in that even though it says Greek Alumni Council, we really have set up many task forces. And in fact, tomorrow I have a meeting with the recruitment and the president of the interfraternity of IFC to do some planning for 2021 and 2022. But I'll link that an address to that in the chat if any of you want to go in and look at it at the university.
That's really cool. I didn't realize that there were, I think of campuses having like analytic councils and things like that, but from an alumni perspective too, having that, maybe it's not as unique as I think it is. I don't think my campus had one, that's for sure. But we also didn't have 60 organizations, so that might have something to do with it. I want to be conscious of people's time. We have about 5 or 6 minutes. So before we let you all go, I wanted to ask two-parters, the queen of the multi-part question. Do you feel like you have a way to provide feedback to your headquarters liaisons, like to say, hey, have you considered this, or it might be better if you that, or something like that? And do you have any, like, if you could give feedback to the communication staff specifically, like one piece of, this is a thing that I think that you're missing, or you're doing great, positive or maybe, critical, what would it be?
One thing I have appreciated is at the end of each academic year, the Chapter Excellence Board advisors are asked for feedback. There is a mid-year review or kind of feedback opportunity as well, but as we're wrapping up the year, being able to say like, hey, like what has your experience been with each chapter that you work with? So they're trying to get some understanding of, have there been chapters that are not as responsive as others to our advisor teams? But there is space in there as well for us to say, this is what was really rewarding about my experience. This is what I found challenging, or where I might offer feedback. And then they follow up on it. And I think that's a really important piece. And this is from my professional work as well. Like you don't want to ask for that feedback if it's just going to go into a file or go into an Excel spreadsheet. I have really appreciated that there is follow-up when I have asked questions or had concerns about things. One of our points of contact will say like, hey, can we talk about that? Or, hey, can you give us more information about that? Or what, I'd love to hear more about your idea. So I think that has been really valuable in recognizing that the feedback channel is there, whether it's at the end of the year in a formal capacity, or we have 2 staff members who are our designated points of contact for my volunteer role, and they are available. We can email them to say, a chapter asked me this question and I'm kind of struggling with how to respond, or I feel like it could go a few different ways, and they'll be able to walk us through that. So the support is absolutely there. The feedback opportunities are there, and knowing that it is welcomed, that it's not just a, let us know. It's a,
we feel like we have to ask, so we ask. Yeah. It's actually valued.
It's genuine. Mm-hmm,
yeah,
for sure.
Anybody have any feedback to the communication staff? Because I recognize the communication staff may not be the main people that you all interact with directly. So anything that you would just want your organization and other organizations to know as communicators when working directly with the alumni that are volunteering?
Well, again, I digress a bit here if I could. We have some serious issues on campus. We're going through as many campuses are, the Abolish Greek efforts. We have challenges with the BIPOC organization, who has determined that Greeks are evil, and spend a lot of time writing inaccurate editorials regarding Greeks, some regarding our chapter itself. I think those issues, plus campus safety, which is really critical right now in Minnesota. But I won't get into all of that. But, these are things that I think need to be addressed. I also think that a common thing that is of interest is recruiting across the board. New members are our lifeblood. And I think our chapter just feels that there hasn't been the support, be it role playing, what have you. I don't know, that international could support them in better training them how to recruit effectively. So I guess those are a couple of things I have in mind.
A little more focus on recruitment. It's definitely been an interesting time for that. So I can see that. Kay or Colleen, anything to add before we go? Well, thanks everybody so much. I'll check the chat one last time, make sure I didn't miss anything. I think we got it. We really, again, appreciate you all taking time out of your day to share with us. I'm always just so fascinated to know, we're all fraternities and sororities. We are all one community as well too, but the way every organization does things a little bit differently is always so fascinating to me. And I think it's really valuable to be able to learn from one another and share and grow in that way. And you guys have been a really big part of that today. So thank you so much again for taking the time. We'll let everybody go. There is a survey in the chat, so grab the link to that, FCA folks, before you go, and see everybody soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Ashley.
much.